Hello and welcome. A couple of weeks ago, I bought an early 1990s Haro Escape frame and fork for just 25 bucks. The Escape is a steel frame rigid mountain bike with, typical frame geometry for the time. I decided to build it up using components from my parts bins. I was mostly successful, but I had to change my plans a couple of times as the build went on. The rear triangle was too narrow for any of my quick release 26-inch rear wheels. So, using an old solid axle, I cold set the frame from 126 millimeters to 132 millimeters. That was still too narrow for a 135 millimeter quick release axle, and I wasn't going to press my luck. I probably could have forced it in, but I'm not crazy about having the bearings under constant compression from the narrow dropouts. So I went with Plan B. I dug out an old Weinmann 519 alloy rim with a solid axle and a Shimano Uniglide 7-speed freehub. After trying various combinations of spacers and settings, I ended up with a wheel that fits. Not what I originally intended, but it met my goal of making a rideable bike. Moving from the rear to the front, I installed an Uno stem on a quill stem adapter, and I used a pair of black spacers to cover the silver adapter, just for looks really. On the cockpit, I used a Shimano Easy Fire 7-speed shifter, a pair of old Snafu clamp-on grips, and a Foam Tour front brake lever, all of which are mounted on a 720mm wide Wake alloy handlebar. The brakes, front and rear, are Wake linear pull units mounted on existing posts which originally held cantilever units. I know this because one of them was still on the frame when I bought it. The front rolling stock consists of a vintage Ritchie 26 alloy wheel and a Bontrager 26 by 2.0 connection trail tire. Here is a look at the rear brake and the tread of the rear tire, a 26 by 2.0 Changshin, and I probably totally messed up that pronunciation. The tire is so new that it still has some casting nibs. Now, the brake cable housing has kind of an odd routing, since the cable boss on the top tube was designed to route it to the centrally positioned seat stay housing. I left it a little long so I didn't have a sharp bend, and I guess I can live with it. The seat tube bears the 4130 chromoly, made in USA and 20.0 sizing decals. And given the bike's age, frankly, I'm mildly surprised that these decals, as well as the ones on the top and the down tubes, are in such good condition. I chose this Schwinn saddle because its shape looks like it would be pretty much age appropriate for the era in which the bike was built. I know for a fact that it's a little older than that because it came off my 1988 World Sport. Now, it doesn't hurt that it's pretty well padded and in decent shape. And the seat post is an Originate that I got from Amazon using my credit card reward points. It's a rather oddly sized 29.6 millimeter unit, and I didn't have anything that size in my parts bins, but didn't pay for it, so yay. I used Blackburn resin flat pedals mounted on a 1x crankset with a 36-tooth chainring and 175mm crank arms. This was originally on my Hyper Urban, and while the chainring is not a narrow wide unit, it'll do for now. Moving towards the back, the chain is a new KMC K7 that I got at Dick's Sporting Goods for, I think like 10 bucks. In fact, that's the only component in the entire build that I actually paid money for. The rear derailleur is a Shimano STX, originally on my vintage Specialized Hard Rock, and the cassette is a Shimano 8-speed minus the smallest cog. Now I can get away with that because the 8-speed and the 7-speed have the same chain spacing. Oh, and I almost forgot to mention the bottom bracket. It's an old school cup and cone unit with a square taper axle. And when I serviced the bike, I discovered that there were no bearings on the non-drive side. Luckily, I had spares. All things considered, I think this build turned out pretty well, and the bike looks pretty sharp. I certainly cannot complain about the cost either. The whole thing has only set me back 35 bucks. I mean, that's pretty darn good. My plans for the bike include a better rear wheel at some point, and a hollow textile crankset with external bearings, just because I like them better. Otherwise, I think I have a pretty nice general use bike on my hands. I have said before that it ain't hoarding if you use the stuff that you're holding on to. Certainly, that worked out pretty well for me in this instance. So if you enjoyed this video, there is a link to a playlist lower left, and there is a link to another video lower right. As always, thanks very much for watching. I really do appreciate that. Goodbye and have a wonderful day.